Hello and welcome to lesson 8-8, completing the square. So this is just one of those other ways where we're going to learn how to solve a quadratic. Just giving you a heads up, you do need to know how to do this way. On the Regents, occasionally they will ask you solve using completing the square. We're going to learn about the other method that they tell you about next week, which is called the quadratic formula. I know that we tell you that you're allowed to solve things whichever method you would like, but for some examples, you will need to use the completing the square. Giving you a heads up. It's a long process, so you need to pay very close attention. If I were you, I would basically write down each of these steps and write down the problem next to it. So we're given this equation, x squared minus 6x minus 11 equals 0. Before we go into solving this, I'm just going to tell you a little more information about completing the square. It's really useful for solving quadratics where your solutions will contain radicals. It's basically used for the equations that we can't factor, which we're going to look at next week. And for the most part, it's basically just used when you can't factor and you don't feel like using the quadratic formula. It's a process that requires you to remember how to factor and just do some mental arithmetic. So step 1 says put the equation into ax squared plus bx equals negative c form. All that means is just move your term to the right-hand side. Your constant, the number that's hanging out by itself. So in my example, my negative 11 is hanging out by itself. So the way to get rid of a negative 11 is to add 11 to both sides. So I'm going to add 11 to both sides. And when I add 11 to both sides, I end up getting x squared minus 6x equals 0 plus 11, which is just 11. Boom, that's step 1. Step 2 says on each side of the equal sign, write a plus, and then draw an empty box, make some room. So that's going to be step 2. I'm going to write x squared minus 6x plus a square. That's why we call it the completing the square, because we're drawing some squares. Just kidding, that's not the real reason, but it helps you think. Equals 11 plus a square. Good. So boom, we have step 2 done. Step 3, divide your middle term or your b value by 2. Put this number in the left and right part of your diamond. Now multiply and put it in the top of your diamond. So now we're going back to the diamond method. So I'm going to draw my diamond. So for this example, my b value, I'm going to underline in blue. This is your b value. What we want to do is we want to divide our b by 2. So I'm going to just draw my diamond. And we always put our b downstairs. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. I now put this in the left part of my diamond and the right part of my diamond. All right, we're still on the step. We're still on step 3. Step 3 says now multiply and put it in the top of your diamond. So I'm going to multiply these two numbers. I'm going to put them in green. I'm going to multiply my negative 3 and my negative 3. What's negative 3 times negative 3? You guessed it. It is a positive 9. Now, we are going to put that into our squares. Okay, we're going to put that into the squares. So we now have that expression. Step 4 says factor the left-hand side and combine the like terms on the right-hand side. So I have x squared. Let me put it in black so we can read it. Let me just erase. We have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 11 plus 9, which is 20. Here's how you factor. It's a trick. You ready? You don't even have to realize how to factor. You go to your diamond, negative 3, negative 3. Those are my factors. I factor x squared minus 6x plus 9 to be x minus 3, x minus 3. and that's equal to 20. Step 5, condense your left-hand side. That's basically saying make it simpler. Instead of writing x minus 3, I'm actually just going to write x minus 3 squared. And set that equal to 20. Step 6 says take the square root of each side. Don't forget your plus or minus. We didn't go over that yesterday, but I'm going to introduce it right now. The square root of x minus 3 squared is just x minus 3 because they cancel. The only way to get rid of the square is to take a radical. So I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root, or 20. The reason why it's plus or minus the square root of 20 is because if I had, I'm just going to throw a number out here, the number 16. 16 is a perfect square because 4 times 4 and negative 4 times negative 4. So we need to indicate that we have a plus solution and a negative solution. Okay. At any time this is going too fast for you, just pause and rewind. That way you can watch the step take place again. That's the purpose of the videos. Step 7 says simplify your radical. So what I do to make it easier for myself is I just write the radical underneath the question. And I simplify it by itself. So I look at the numbers that make 20, 4 and 5, 2 and 2. I circle, 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 and I write them under my radical. Okay? So I get 2 times 2 times 5. Double on the inside, single on the outside. So I circle my 2's. They go on the outside. And I get 2 radical 5. So my equation is x minus 3 equals plus or minus 2 radical 5. Now step 8, get the x by itself on the left-hand side. So the only way to get rid of a minus is to add. So I add 3. So my 3's cancel, and I get x equals 3 plus or minus 2 radical 5. That is your final answer. That is the completing the square method. I'm going to zoom out so you can rewrite all of this. But it's a very general process. You really have to memorize it. The part that's the most work is basically probably this step. I'm going to put it in yellow. Is this step right here. Okay? So what I would do is rewatch this snippet right now before we go on to the independent practice part where we're going to just do 4 problems together. So this is a longer video because I want to make sure that you can watch this process multiple times. Okay? Let's go on to the independent 4 problems. Okay. So I have x squared minus 4x equals 6. If you look at step 1, it says put the equation into ax squared plus bx equals negative c form, which is basically saying move your constant to the right-hand side. My constant is already on the right-hand side, so I can jump a step or 2. Step 2 basically says draw a plus sign and draw. So I'm going to do x squared minus 4x plus a square equals 6 plus a square, right? Now my next part is I draw my diamond. Put my negative 4 downstairs. I now say to myself, what's negative 4 divided by 2? You guessed it, it's negative 2. So I put my negative 2 on the left and right part of my diamond. And then I do negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. And I put a 4 in both squares. Okay. I now factor x squared minus 4x plus 4, which is just x minus 2, x minus 2. And then I combine my like terms. What's 6 plus 4? 10. Okay. We now make this side look less busy. So we'd write it as x minus 2 squared equals 10. The only way to get rid of a square in math is to take the square root of both sides. My squares cancel, so I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus radical 10. I say to myself, what goes into 10? 2 and 5. That's about it. There's no double, so I can't really simplify a radical 10. I now get rid of my minus 2 by adding 2. And I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. That is your final answer. And you just solved a question where you had to complete the square. Okay? Take a breather, watch this recap of question number 1. If you would like, try to do the second question by yourself. Now in our second example, we have x squared plus 20x equals negative 40. So all these examples on this page are just like the first example we just did together. We immediately go into drawing our squares. So I have x squared plus 20x plus a square equals negative 40 plus a square. I go to my diamond. If I were you, if I had colored pencils, I would take out some colored pencils to make this much more easier. I put my 20 downstairs. I do 20 divided by 2, which is 10. And then I do 10 times 10, which is 100. That goes in my squares. Okay. I now factor x squared plus 20x plus 100. But the best part about the diamond is I already know what my factors are. It's x plus 10, x plus 10. And that's equal to negative 40 plus 100, which is 60. If you don't want to use the diamond to factor, you can just do what adds up to 20 and multiplies to 100. You just have to take out that factor pair sheet from 1 to 100 that I gave you. Thing is, this is too busy, so we make it simpler. X plus 10 squared equals 60. The only way to get rid of a square is to take the square root. So I take the square root, and I take the square root. The square root of x plus 10 squared is just x plus 10. And that's equal to plus or minus the square root of 60. We now simplify the square root of 60. So what I do is I go to the right-hand side. What makes 60? 2 and 30. What makes 30? 2 and 15. What makes 15? 3 and 5. Circle, 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 circle. They all go under my radical. So 2 2s, 1 2, 1 3, and 1 5. Double on the inside, single on the outside. So this becomes 2 radical 15. Because 3 times 5 is 15. I now basically bring my 2 radical 15 to where my plus or minus radical 60 is. And I'm now solving for x. X plus 10 equals plus or minus 2 radical 15. The only way to get rid of a plus 10 is to take away 10. So I get x equals negative 10 plus or minus 2 radical 15. That is your final answer. So what I would do, I'm going to zoom out, make sure this whole question is written down. I would highly recommend that you are writing down these problems as we solve them because you will be doing an independent practice shortly, and I'm giving you a heads up. It is getting graded 100% on accuracy. It is 3 questions, and you need to make sure that you know how to do this perfectly, because the minute you take the regions, I want you to go to this question and do it right away. That way you can sort of be like, oh, I don't need to complete in the square ever again, yada, yada, yada. All right? Now let's go on to question number 3. I have x squared plus 2x equals 8. So I have x squared plus 2x equals 8. Step 1, I draw my squares. So I have x squared plus 2x plus a square equals 8 plus a square. This is your first step always whenever your number is already on the right-hand side. I draw my diamond. 2 down below. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so I put a 1 on both parts of my diamond. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay. I now factor x squared plus 2x plus 1, but if you do the diamond, guess what? It did the work for you. If you did the diamond, it did the work for you. I get x plus 1 times x plus 1. And that's equal to 8 plus 1, which is 9. Here's the issue. We don't like writing x plus 1 twice, so we just condense it. We simplify it. We make it easier to work with. I get x plus 1 squared equals 9. The only way to get rid of a square in the mathematical realm of the world is to take the square root of both sides. Take the square root, take the square root. I get x plus 1 equals, if you do the square root of 9, you don't have to do the factor tree, but we'll go to the side and do the factor tree anyway. I do my factor tree. What makes 9? 3 and 3. That's it. So I get radical 3 times 3, double on the inside, single on the outside. So there's nothing left in my radical. But remember, it's not just 3, it is plus or minus 3. Now, the only way to get rid of that plus 1 is to take away 1. Take away 1, take away 1. I get x equals negative 1 plus or minus 3. So here's the thing. We actually have some nice numbers here. So what I'm now going to show you is how we actually can simplify and break apart this expression. The reason why we're saying plus or minus is because we're taking into account 2 possible real number solutions for our quadratic. I'm going to break it apart. And we're going to get x equals the positive, the negative 1 plus the 3, and the x equals the negative 1 minus the 3. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2, so I can have x equals 2. And negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4, so I can get negative 4. So I have 2 solutions. On a quiz or a test, if you wrote it like these, you get some points. Or if you wrote it like this, you would get the exact same amount of points. They are both 100% correct. You would not lose points as long as you wrote out one of those 2 possible solution pathways. All right, let's go on to our last and final example. I'm going to zoom out so you can take a picture, you can write it out, hit pause, and now we're going on to the next example. I have x squared minus 8x equals 24. Step 1, I draw out my squares. X squared minus 8x plus a square equals 24 plus a square. All right. Step 2. Take that number on the inside, or that b value, and I divide it by 2. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. That's the number that goes on both parts of my diamond. Negative 8 goes downstairs. Negative 4, negative 4. And what's negative 4 times negative 4? You guessed it. 2 negatives make a positive. So I put a 16 on the inside. Okay. I now factor x squared minus 8x plus 16. But guess what? If you do the diamond, you already know the factors. That's x minus 4, x minus 4. So I get x minus 4 equals 24 plus 16, which is 40. Thing is, mathematicians are lazy. We don't like to write things as a mess, so we condense them. X minus 4 just becomes x minus 4 squared. And I get my 40. The only way to get rid of this handy-dandy square is to take the square root of both sides. So I take the square root, and I get an x minus 4. And that's equal to the plus or minus square root 40. Now what we do, we see that plus or minus 40, square root 40, we go to the side and we rationalize it. We basically break it apart to make it easier to work with. What makes 40? 2 and 20. What makes 20? 2 and 10. What makes 10? 2 and 5. Circle those primes. We write them under the radical. 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. Double on the inside, single on the outside. Double. Boom. This becomes 2 radical, whatever 2 times 5 is, which is a 10. So this solution ends up having a 2 radical 10. So I go back to the top and I write x minus 4 equals plus or minus 2 radical 10, which we got from simplifying this expression. The only way to get rid of a minus 4 in the mathematical dimensions are to add 4. Add 4. 4's cancel. And I get x equals 4 plus or minus 2 radical 10. That is your final answer. So ladies, this was your final complete the square example for today. To make sure you know how to do completing the square next week on Monday, you are just doing a day of completing the square practice. It is going to be done on Delta Math. Make sure you do your independent practice questions. There are 3 and 3 only. I believe I have office hours today, so please make sure you watch this video early in the morning. That way we can make sure you get those questions 100% correct. Again, if you have questions, email myself, email Ms. Townsend. Make sure you write your daily question on the Google Classroom. That way you can get your attendance. Again, make sure you watch this video multiple times. I'm telling you right now, this skill does not go away. Pops up on the Regents, pops up in my geometry class, and even pops up in Algebra 2, and eventually when you get to pre-calc and calculus. I've been completing the square since I was in 10th grade. Okay? So, make sure you watch this video. Make sure you understand it. Make sure you memorize it. Make sure you live it and you love it. If you have any questions, email me. If you would like, I'm zooming out so you can look at this whole page one more time. This is completing the square.